So I would just like to quickly introduce our two speakers and then pass over to them. Dr. Kirti Ranchod is a neurologist, a Global Atlantic Fellow for Equity in Brain Health, and a co-founder and chair of the African Brain Health Network. She has served on the board of Alzheimer's South Africa, and she has extensive clinical experience in medicine and neurology. She has recently completed a project, REMI East Africa in Uganda, to support healthcare workers with practical mental health tools. Her interests include the role of traditional practices in promoting health, the neuroscience of art, and understanding the different perceptions of memory. She is passionate about brain health, neuroscience, and making this accessible, relevant, and practical. Sylvia Vollenhoven is a writer, award-winning journalist, playwright, and filmmaker. In 2019, she was appointed the University of Johannesburg's first ever Professor of Practice. She was awarded Sweden's main journalism prize by the Publiksklubben, the prestigious Nordic Academy of Writers and Publishers. The citation reads, "For doing a brave, professional job under difficult circumstances." Her work includes the documentary Josie Gold, Revolution, Rumba and Romance, a play about the renowned writer Alex Laguma, Cold Case, Revisiting Dulcie September, which won both the inaugural Adelaide Tambo Award for Human Rights in the Arts, as well as the Stanley Bank Audience Award. The Keeper of Kum, a creative non-fiction novel, and she was a guest lecturer at the Universities of the Free State, Cape Town and Stellenbosch. She is a member of the International Emmy Awards 2018 jury, and she led the media projects for the UK Thomson Foundation in association with Oxford and Cardiff Universities. I'll pass over to both of you. Thank you.
So I really enjoyed planning this with Kirti because, as I said earlier on, I think that it's about time that we close this huge and artificial gap between science, the arts, and tradition, culture, and intuitiveness and intuition. So I'm going to look at what Kirti has proposed as a subject today: loss, grief, and healing, and the power of ritual. And I'm going to focus on ritual, which, just looking at the things that we do, the things we can do, the things that our cultures have available for us, looking at that as through that particular lens, we get to how we can deal with loss, grief, and healing. And to get there, I'm going to tell you a quick story about myself. Many years ago, I became extremely ill. Today, I've just got sinus. I'm not really sick. I sound a little bit nasal, but it's that seasonal thing that so many of us struggle with. And in this process of this illness, I lose my home, and I'm forced to give up a dream job that I had at the time in West Africa, working for the Gates Foundation, doing media training. Everything comes crashing down, and even the marriage that I had at the time comes to an end. Ritual literally saved my life. There was a time when I was fairly bedridden. I could hardly get up in the mornings. I used to get up. I had a little cottage that a friend loaned to me in the Cape, in a place called Betty's Bay, somewhere on the coast. And fortunately, at that stage, as I was going through far too much for me to cope with, I had a friend who had a cottage. And it's always good to have these friends when you are struggling. And she said, well, you can stay there for as long as you like to get better, which really helped. And at that time, I had no clue what was happening to me, why I was ill. I had gone in a very short time from having enough resources, enough money, having a great job, to spending all of that on specialists and doctors and going from one expensive specialist to the other. And if any of you have had serious medical problems, you'll know that it doesn't take long to drain your finances when that happens. And finally, a friend of mine who's also a media person, filmmaker and journalist, but who also uses a lot of her innate creativity and intuitive talent to do her job, looked at me and she said, "Have you ever thought of consulting a sangoma?" And I was very taken aback because I grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist and we didn't even discuss traditional healing. It wasn't even on the table. But I think what made me listen to her and consider it was because basically I was broke. I had no more money left for fancy specialists. And I was getting sicker and sicker. I would get up in the morning and I had only enough energy to stay up for half a day. By midday every day I was back in bed and not doing much. And not only did she convince me to go and see a sangoma, but she said, "I have seen friends who are as sick as you are and who have these problems, and all of the doctors, the most conclusive diagnosis I got from all of those people that I paid tens of thousands of rand was that you have chronic fatigue." And finally, I said to this one specialist, what does that mean? I've heard it now over and over. And she looked at me and she said, "Chronic fatigue is what we say when we don't know what to say." And that was very comforting. At that point, I started to become scared because nothing in my own background had prepared me for being sick and not being able to get a solution from mainstream medicine, or at least try something. I tried so many different drugs and prescriptions, and none of it helped. So the friend who said that I should try a sangoma also said to me, "I've seen some of my friends and some people I know who are as sick as you are. And it's what I would call a calling. And when your ancestors need to get your attention, they make you really, really ill, and I've seen this happen. And then if you start listening and you take on board that maybe there's something important that you should do, things can change." And this is where my journey started. I was in this little cottage, half bedridden, and I realized that I had just come back from this fantastic job in West Africa and started unpacking some of my books and things, and I realized that I had a collection of books about a 19th century visionary called Thabo, who was a bushman who had walked for miles and miles, something like 400 kilometers, from some part of the Karoo near the Northern Cape to Cape Town to find people who could write down his people's stories. And not only had I collected all these books, a lot of which I hadn't read at that point, but at some stage I met my friend again, and she described these books in the cottage that I had, the covers, what they looked like. She described what Thabo looked like, because there's a picture in one of the books, without ever having seen them, without ever having visited me at that point where I was living. And she said, "I think he wants you to tell some kind of story, because when I see you, I can see his presence all around you, and it's quite disturbing." And as if that wasn't enough, I then started delving into this, and somebody suggested, "Why don't you do a past life regression?" Another thing that was a bit horrifying and definitely against all of the very strict fundamentalist beliefs that I was brought up with. But I did, and I went to see a hypnotherapist in Cape Town, a very reputable woman called Claudia Klein, and she did this regression with me where I instantly saw and started speaking to, but very, very conscious. It's nothing very complicated. You're just accessing a part of your memory that you didn't think you had. And having this conversation with Thabo across this space and time. And I was told in this session that I had been his niece in a former life, and his niece was called Barata Ken, and it's a Kam name. Translated, it means pathway of the horses. And I thought, is that why I'm so crazy? And then I had been doing this research, looking at his story, reading all these books that I'd collected, and when I went back to the research that I'd done and went back to one of these books, I found this paragraph that had been taken out of the archives, ordered in one of the books that had been written about the Blair Lloyd archive at the University of Cape Town's Jagger Library, where I had spent a lot of time in the 80s without being aware of all of this. And there was this story about Klabo's niece, who had been the little baby of his brother who was killed, and soon after his brother was killed, his sister died, probably of being heartbroken. His sister-in-law, rather, his brother's wife, and he was left to bring up this little girl, whom they also nicknamed Betchy because her English name was Elizabeth, which is my second name. And I started paying real attention to this story and went on a journey. At first I thought the journey would be telling the story of Klabo. And then I realized, no, a lot of people have told the story. People like Pippa Scottners, who has worked with the archive of Blake and Lloyd quite extensively. And so I started writing the story mainly because I had no option.
The way of the ancients, to close my ears to the voices that whisper the wisdom of African mysteries. But I am a guardian, a keeper of spirit treasures, so the ancients have come calling. I've been seriously ill. Modern doctors can't tell me what's wrong. I'm led to a traditional healer, a Sangoma, to help with this calling of ancestral spirits. I worry that my dreams have brought me to a wanting, a descendant of British settlers. He says he has to do an ancient Femba ritual, a cleansing. Some call it exorcism. After the ritual cleansing, I hear clearly an ancestor, a 19th century Bushman visionary called Kabo. He guides me to one of the last remaining chiefs of our people.
As ik ga naar een plek toe, en het gaat over de zin, dan beweeg ik op heilige kleding. Hier moet je respect doen, want je praat en je werkt met die vaderse goed van die aarde.
In 1869, Kabo Uigoro Janchitwen, a Bushman waymaker, journeyed for many miles to tell the story of a dying culture to Victorian experts. Kabo's legacy languishes, now to only a few, in the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. But now he has reached out to make his bequest known among our people, to find healing in the way of the ancients.
A Dutch commando killed 500 Bushmen on one day. It was like shooting 500 Finland.
Ik zie ver afwisseling, maar je moet de gereedte krijgen gereed van de ontvang van de zin.
Wat is het toch? Het is ook zo. Ik doe dit met lands.
Nama koba para kwa kwingi, masa si.
And so I wrote the book, which was published by Tafelberg, and adapted it as a dance drama, which opened at the National Arts Festival in Grahamstown and also played at Artscape in Cape Town. And a lot of the writing, some of the writing was, my background is in journalism, and so came to me in quite an ordinary way. And some of the writing, I can still read the book today, and it is as if I'm reading certain pieces for the first time. And pieces like this, stories know no boundaries of time or space. Stories know no limits of place. The Kum, our stories, travel from one realm to the next as easily as a mountain stream falls to the ocean. It's given to few to be the keepers of the Kum, to protect the treasures that touch the hearts of people. Thabo and the keepers roam the astral planes at will, wielding kum stories powerful enough to hold the world in place. A keeper is the servant of the kum. And pieces like that made its way into the book and into the dance drama as well, are as if it's sort of come from somewhere else, and I realize that is how creativity works. But sometime after I had done the ritual with the Sangoma and visited the woman who did the hypnotherapy, Claudia Klein, the hypnotherapist, called me up and she said, I've been doing this work, and she's a German woman who's relocated to Cape Town, very interested in African traditions. And she phoned me up and she said, this has never happened to me before. I've been doing this work for years and years and years, but there is something about this character that you have brought into my awareness that just won't leave, and I've never had this experience before. I've become completely intrigued by who he was when he lived, and what my connection is and what has brought me to Africa. And she's never seen her role quite as in that way before, that maybe there was a time when she lived in Africa previously. And this is the dance, this is some extracts from the dance drama that we did.
After that, the story went into darkness, but already in the section about conflict, there was a lot of darkness coming out, things that I thought I'd forgotten.
our stories, our letters in our bodies. Our stories, they talk, they tap, they quiver. Our stories make the people silent. And in that silence, we feel the deafening inside. The drums beating. The winds flapping. The quick. Deep inside. Breathing, exposing. It's a thing that we see. But the way it's true. It's a thing that we see. We feel this magic. We feel the sensation. Our letters, our stories, in our bodies.
We still wear apartheid race tags like raw tattoos, hidden, never mentioned in polite society. Coloredness is a daily insurance of perpetuating the broken. Perhaps travel is just my imagination. It's the pain of centuries forcing me to embark on this journey, to unlock the painful prison of coloredness.
Als ik ga naar een plek toe, als het gaat over medicijnen, dan beweeg ik op heilige kerk. Hier moet je respect doen, van je praat en je werkt met die vadersgoed, van die aard. Wat jij nuttig moet gebruiken en respect. En toen ik ingaan heb ik voor hulle gesê, ik ga net reinig die plek. Met die boeg. Ik ga net reinig en dan gaan ek 'n bietjie van die boeg opbraak. Saam met die gifbom, wat ons noem die groen. Wat ook pleister, medisyne pleister is. Reinig in die plek. Toe gaan die vergadering aan besef vir hulle. Die derde dag sal ons weet wat is waarheid. Van hier is die kring nie vol nie. Dit wil die Here my wys. Hier is ons met mekaar oorpraat.
Alice in Wonderland. And Alice says, if I had a world of my own, everything would be nonsense. And if we look at the way that we live, things are a little bit upside down. We celebrate things that are really quite mundane, and we avoid the extraordinary, but we expect the exceptional. So going on this journey for the last years, more than a decade, has taught me the value of honoring our African traditions, honoring our African stories, in order to understand ourselves. There is lots of value in what colonials have brought to us and what people in other parts of the world have contributed to our culture. But the problem with what has happened in South Africa is that far too much of our indigenous knowledge, our indigenous wisdom, and cultures and traditions have been suppressed to make way for foreign culture and foreign understandings of who we are. And I'm convinced that part of that was why I became ill and why I had to tell the story. I'm going to stop there for a while so that we can... I'll just touch on the other book that I have contributed to, Rethinking Africa, with a group of indigenous women, and the subtitle is Indigenous Women Reinterpret Southern Africa's Past. And the reason why I just want to end with that is because I write the opening chapter in this book. And as just after I had submitted it to the publishers, I have a dream, a really, really strange dream. And I think I'm awake. I wake up from this dream, and there are people in my room, extremely busy, performing some sort of ritual, and the room is dark, and I'm lying in my bed. My eyes are half closed, and the first feeling you get is a little bit of tension and fear. You think, who are these people in my room? And then the next awareness that comes is maybe they're not people in my room. So I lie there very still, and through these half-closed eyes, watch these people perform a ritual and then leave. And after that, I'm fully awake, and the room is empty, and I realize that there is something wrong with the chapter that I have submitted for this book. I have to revisit it, and I have to write some addition. And so I go back to my computer and I call the publishers and say, is it too late to submit a final draft? And I have no idea what it is that I should be writing. And then when I read the chapter that I've written, I realize that in the book that I mentioned previously, The Keep of the Kum and the Dance Drama, these things have been dedicated to my maternal grandmother. And I have not acknowledged my father and my father's people because I grew up with a stepfather, didn't know my biological father at all. And this is extremely important work. So if I want the support of my ancestors on both sides of my lineage, I should acknowledge both sides. So I ask the publishers to hold on for a bit and recall the chapter and then add a PS at the end in which I acknowledge my father and his people. And after that, I sleep peacefully. And that is the chapter in the book that I've just mentioned. The chapter is called Writing Ourselves Back into History, the liberating narrative of who we are. And that is a challenge that we all have, whether we're looking at our daily lives that have become a bit devoid of meaningful ritual. We have lots of ritual in our daily lives, but meaningful ritual has taken a back seat. We find it, a lot of us find it easy to do packaged prayers and routines day after day. But the kind of interaction that all our cultures, in our indigenous cultures, that are embedded in all our cultures, the kind of interaction with our spiritual world and our ancestral world and our physical world, and those seamless connections have been broken. And so what I've had to do is go back and work with a healer like the one you've seen in the film, Neil Campbell, who was born and brought up in Botswana and works very much in that tradition, but also has taken on other Southern African traditions in his methodology. Work with those ancient traditions that we've kind of lost in our urban, not just in our daily urban lives, but also in the religions that we've brought in from other parts of the world, these foreign religions who have all mitigated against anything traditional surviving to the present day, and reintroduce into my life anyway, meaningful ritual, and making sure that I understand the connection between health and especially mental health and emotional and spiritual health and daily practices. I'll give this a skip because I think we're running out of time. This is just a collection of pictures. We have done a theatre piece called Kretua Eva van der Kaap, which is a play about a 17th century woman who was a young girl taken as a slave into the household of Jan van Riebeeck. And everybody knows the story of Jan van Riebeeck, but few people know the story of Kretua. And the play opened in Holland, in Amsterdam, and did a 6-week tour of Holland, and then played in various parts of South Africa. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is because by the time I wrote this play, I had realized the importance of ritual in the work that I do. And so we started that scene in the photograph. There's the very, very first workshop that we did before we even started the writing process. We went to the castle in Cape Town, which is the site where she grew up and where she was originally buried, and did a ritual to ask for assistance with the play. I'm going to skip this. Yeah, and the illness, well, I must say that as I get ready to celebrate my 70th birthday in a couple of months' time, apart from seasonal allergies, I've never been healthier, and I've never had any return of that extremely debilitating illness of some decades ago. And on some days I feel I have more energy now than I did when I was a teenager. But that's maybe just my delusions. But yes, I'm very grateful that all of that is past, and clearly writing the play, writing the work that I do, being in touch with my ancestors, creating ritual in my life to maintain daily contact, understanding that modern existence has cut us off from important rituals. Some of us, if we don't have the saving grace of music, would be completely lost. But apart from music, we have stripped our lives of the connection with the unseen, and you know, it shows in so much real physical illness, in so much social ills, in all kinds of pathologies in our individual lives and in our society. And the work that I do, the plays that I write, the books, the films that I make, and the teaching that I do at various universities is aimed at pulling all of this together, is aimed at a complete synthesis of science and spirit and the seen and the unseen, and helping us understand that there was a time, and there will be again, when there weren't these artificial primitive separations between systems of knowledge and what we know and what is intuitive. So, thank you.
From concentrating on the sacred in terms of ritual, I'm going to bring it, is it not? Is that better? Yeah. I'm going to bring it to the mundane, almost reductionist aspect in terms of ritual and what we can learn or what we experience when we go through ritual. I'm going to start with a quote from an author and academic poet, Yiga Galau Waldeis, who has written a book called Native Colonialism, really about what we do to ourselves. lived in a world where tradition gave rise to knowledge, and that knowledge allowed us to live in the world and not against it. So if we bring a knowledge not based on our people's experiences, we make our people slaves to other people's knowledge. And in the work I'm doing, I have to question whether in part this is what we're doing in terms of our approaches to health and well-being, including mental health. We have been through this incredible period with regard to COVID and lockdown and all the socio-economic issues that have resulted as a consequence of that. And with that, we've experienced grief and loss in so many different ways. We understand that there's increasing problems with regards to mental health, but so much of the approaches that I see written about or expressed is knowledge from somewhere else, right? Not that this doesn't work. I am from the biomedical system. I am a neurologist. This is valid knowledge. These systems work, the treatment works, but not for everything, not for everyone, and not in all circumstances, right? And we understand that. We see people where we know they are accessing treatment and it's not helping, right? Or we relate to Sylvia's story, which I found quite profound, because I can tell you there's nothing in my medical training that would have allowed me to help in any way, or even to understand, actually, in terms of experience or even in terms of treatment. And so part of what I am trying to do is try to also look at what we have within our traditions, within our cultures, within our indigenous knowledge systems that help us to heal. And how can we get these different knowledge systems to speak to each other and work together, which is very challenging, and I don't actually have answers yet. I only have questions. But I think it's important for us to have these discussions and to have these questions going forward. With regards, so like I said, I'm going to bring the ritual back to the mundane and the reductionist aspect. What do we need to heal? What do we need in terms of moving from this process of loss and grieving towards health and well-being? First, love, loss, grief, and healing are intertwined. They're not separate processes, almost like, the root of what I would say life DNA molecule, which is, the helix that is intertwined on itself. And these four processes are part of what we have to go through. They're not separate, and we can't approach all of them separately either. I read something beautiful recently, and I forget who wrote it, but that grief is an extension of love. And that makes sense. Whatever we lose in terms of somebody we love, or whether it's hopes or ambitions, or whether it is a job that we had, a new stage of our lives, there is this process that we have to facilitate. And what do we need to do this from a practical perspective? We need community and the ability to communicate with people who will understand us, support us, show us empathy. We need art and music and dance, because all of them have such a profound impact on the way we respond to the stresses that we're going through and how we actually navigate these problems and move forward in terms of our problem-solving capacity. The science behind music is quite fascinating, and maybe just mention it briefly. When we listen to music, what happens is that it activates a specific part of the brain called the limbic system, which helps us to process emotions. So on a very subconscious level, when we listen to music, we're processing emotions related to the memory that we have of that music, or the experience of that music, even if we're hearing it for the first time. I think of it like also that we don't just hear music, we feel music, right? Like if there's music that you know from, that you have a strong association with, you transport it back in time because of your memory, but you also feel it. You feel what you felt then. It's not separate. So that's how music actually helps us to facilitate this process of healing. In terms of ritual and healing and music, it's something that is common to many different cultures, and I'll relate what I am familiar with from mine. But what happens when we lose somebody we love? We have a mourning period which will last 11 or 12 days, and every day we would meet in the evening and we would sing particular songs or bhajans that are associated with loss and with mourning. Now, there's very specific instances, obviously, where I have lost somebody and that's what I will remember when I hear that music. But some of that is also related to music I would have heard with my grandmother, and I can remember her singing along to it. So I don't only relate to this when I hear it with sadness, but I also relate to the music with almost love, because that's what I associate with it, the people I loved at that time in my life. I also have the association with resilience and healing when I hear that music. So even though it's associated with loss, I also remember a time in my life when I had to move forward. I had to accept that loss, and this music also helps me to understand the processes that I had to go forward. And so it's about what you have within your tradition, within your culture, from your community, or if you don't know, where do you find these sources of knowledge so that we can have these sources, and what do we share amongst the different cultures that we have within South Africa. What else do we need in terms of healing? We need a sense of certainty, right? When we experience loss, there's so much uncertainty, there's so much that we're trying to cope with. Ritual gives us a sense of certainty that helps us again just to find sort of roots so that we can move forward, find the solutions to the problem that we're facing currently. One of the other rituals that I'm going to mention is something that we do on Diwali, which really is a celebration. It's our festival of lights, happens once a year, and it is symbolic of the victory of Ram over Ravan, and so light over darkness. But my day starts with going to the cemetery or the crematorium. And I would visit my grandparents' graves or go to the crematorium and light a lamp, light some incense, offer food, and offer a prayer. So the day of celebration starts with an acknowledgement of the people I loved and lost, and almost this sense of communicating with them, even though they're not here physically, which helps me again in terms of processing that loss and understanding that the relationships we have don't end, right? My grandmother stays my grandmother. My uncle stays my uncle. And that process is so important for us to acknowledge and to accept that the relationship is still there. So what these rituals do is they give us a sense of communicating with people and accepting the relationships that we have and valuing these relationships in a different form, in a sense, and allow us to move forward. The next thing that we would need to access that ritual offers is a sense of spirituality, connection with the sacred, something beyond what we understand. And the science, again, is quite fascinating. So what they found is that people who do have a sense of spirituality or connection with the sacred or religious do experience reduced rates of depression. They have better health outcomes and better coping skills. So what I've done is I've given you specific examples and just sort of an outline of what we need to go forward with regard to health and healing. And I would love to hear from you in the audience in terms of specific rituals that you have to potentially deal with loss, because we learn from each other and we go forward learning from each other. I grew up very differently. It was a very traditional community, but I would have also rejected so much from my tradition and my culture. A lot because of a very subtle sort of power dynamic in a sense. And it has been a process to start embracing this, and possibly with going to India in terms of just having a different perspective on what I have within my tradition and my culture, and then looking at it globally and realizing, oh, there's differences and there's lots of commonality in terms of the way we do this.
Especially if they're involved, or often when they're involved with a certain religion, practice, that they are dogmatic. And in my own growth, I've tried to eschew the dogma and just look at the original symbolism, even reading old texts about how it started to get to the meaning of that practice, and then emphasize that and try and remove the dogma, according to it. And often when I've mentored younger students, I sort of say, if any ritual feels chain-like to you, then it's not good for you. Nothing with chains should be good for you. Rituals should be something that you want to embrace. And I think we all have to, through our lives, you practice some things earlier on when you're younger, and as you grow older, because life changes or you're in a different place, I think rituals should evolve and adapt to the place. Evolve.
Just my experience on today, and I think it's opened my mind in the sense of, I'm a mixed race kid, adult now. So my mom was white and my dad was colored, and when you talk rituals and you talk culture, I can't connect to it because I've had both sides, and it's always been a case of who you're going to choose, So there's never really been a place for me to connect to. I've never connected to a race, to a culture, and up until this point, I've spent my whole life like just looking to connect with something and somebody. I went as far as going to different religions because, for example, in Islam, when someone dies, it's like gathering. Everybody comes together. I never had that in my family. So when my mom died, I didn't know how to deal. There was nobody that I could go to. There was no gathering. The funeral happened, and then everybody carries on with their life. So that made Islam really attractive to me. But that wasn't for me. So it's just been a constant thing of like, do I fit here, do I fit here? And it makes sense now why there hasn't been an opportunity to because I haven't had anything to go back to. There hasn't been a cultural ground that I can go back to if I feel rocky or life-sick, So that's opened my mind a lot. Thanks.
I just wanted to come into what she was saying and what she's saying. And Sylvia's story was about returning and finding the selves in the connectivity of lineage, of the cells that make us, that we hold even when we don't know, in the past, many past lives. So that's one thought I want to keep, but I want to say also I want us to disturb a little bit this meaning or understanding of ritual as only going back and only with what I think is my box of belonging. Life is not in boxes. I've gone some of the journeys she's traveled, I've traveled them. I won't even share my rituals because we can be here for the whole year. But some of the things that I do which are ritual, yes, they have also roots in the, like dance, conscious movement, dance as conscious movement, not just as discoing. Although sometimes in the disco there's also quite a lot of power. So there are a lot of rituals that may have roots there and there, but which actually are a universal language of life and we all are living creatures. We all are something before we were these boxes. So maybe it could be a bit, excuse me if I feel like I'm talking.
I receive.
Okay.
Please.
Okay. So maybe we could liberate ourselves by not closing ourselves only in boxes that we think, I belong here, but actually in saying, I am human, I am energy, before I am all these other boxes. And where could I find myself? Where could I find a home? And these homes don't have to be one home, they are multiple homes that you can find yourself in. And you might be surprised, I know I sound like a cracked record in these things. I always say if there's anything that fascinates me, is the racial categories of South Africa. They are so, if you go into the theories of culture being a creation and race and what being a construct, it is South Africa in its complexity. I sometimes run workshops and I say those who see themselves as white go this way, those who see themselves as Indian, da 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 da. And I always get shocked at the people who see themselves white and how I see them from having lived all over the world. So you might be surprised to find what is in your lineage, which you don't know, which you could find out through facilitation when you have thought that you are Africans.
Thank you all for attending. We will be having 2 more events. I have a walkabout with Tammy on the 3rd of September. That will be in the Region Center. And there'll be another event with Tops Mohammed and Pongiwe Usezi, who plays the Ubuhadi on the 10th of September. So I hope to see all of you then. Thank you.